Alright, so, somehow, some way, this channel is still up. I don't know how. Because the subject matter in the previous video was completely prohibited just a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to keep testing the waters by talking about Mariupol. Because that is my dude that I follow. If you remember from the last video, if you want his name, you can eat my you-know-what. He's actually in a village outside of there called Sartana, which is a Greek village. Did not know that. It's very interesting. Apparently, Catherine II redistributed the Greek population further into that area to prevent it from being invaded. So, yeah, history lesson that I got from that video where he interviewed about a dozen people. And those interviews really, they put a lot into perspective. First, he was talking to a woman who she was just distraught. She had to basically put her granddaughters on a train to God knows where, and she has no idea where they are now. The second person that he talked to was part of security forces, and he was talking about how this whole situation went down. Excuse me for a second. And he was saying that the first group that actually started shelling the village was the Azov battalion. Now I want you to keep that in mind, because this is going to be a theme moving forward in what these on the ground witnesses in the town of Sartana were telling him. So the first shells that dropped came from Azov held Mariupol. And sorry, I'm trying to get my volume right, and it's just not. Maybe that. Okay. And he was saying that he was there to do security on some store to keep it from getting looted anymore, either by foreign forces or people who were domestic. I have a glare on my hand. And after they finished the interview, dude says, "Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have." And it cut to a segment where they're just walking together and still talking. And the dude brought him to a church that is across the street from a residential building, and behind the residential building is a school. And he said that the first shells, which were fired by the Azov battalion, hit the church where people were hiding. Also hit the apartment complex. Nobody was in the above ground part of the complex, but there was a basement part of the complex. The shell busted the roof through. I don't know if anybody died. I don't think he mentioned whether or not anyone died. Just that the people who had been living there, their accommodations were completely destroyed. And I got to see that in the video too. And then it goes to him going to the school, where there's actually a humanitarian shelter operating in the basement of the school. And at first he was talking to this group of men who were distributing food to refugees. And the oldest one said that was just talking about the night that the bombing started. And dude asked him if he knew who was carrying out the attack. And he said, "How am I supposed to know?" And this wasn't the night of the shelling. This is the first night of the bombing. 2 different nights. And he said, "How am I supposed to know who was dropping the weapons? I was running for my life. I was in a shelter when it started, so I didn't get to see who started it." And there were 2 other guys inside of this food kitchen who said that they were actually outside when it started. And so dude asked them, who dropped the bombs. And the one dude, without hesitation, said that it was Azov that bombed the city. Uh, and dude asked him, "How do you? Why do you think that it was?" He said Ukraine, but it's the Azov Battalion controls the Ukrainian military in that region. He said it's because the plane that dropped the bombs circled over the city, which is not even imaginable for Russian fighters. If they get anywhere near the city, they're going to get shot down. So they do their turns in this set of fields off to the side of the village. And the guy said confidently it was a Ukrainian plane, because they're the only ones that can fly over the city, that started the bombing campaign in Sartana. So dude asks him, why do you believe that the Ukrainian military, the Azov Battalion, I'm not even comfortable saying it's the Ukrainian military at this point, and I'll get into that in a little bit too. Why he believed that they would do it. And the third guy chimes in and he says they were trying to incite a panic in the village, which would then force villagers to flee to Mariupol. And once they're in Mariupol, they're not allowed to leave. They have to stay in the city, specifically as human shields. So that's pretty insane. the very idea of that is insane. But then he starts talking to a woman who's actually helping organize the shelter. And he asked her about the day that the shelling started, not the bombings. And she said that day, up until that point, there was nothing going on. Like, Russian soldiers were just coming door to door, like, "Hey, can we check? Just make sure you don't have any tiny mustaches hanging out around the house." And everyone in this shelter seemed to be in agreement that the Russian soldiers that were in the region were actually fairly decent. Like, they weren't killing anybody, and they weren't targeting civilians, and they were literally just going around making sure that nobody from the Azov Battalion was around. But the day that this attack happened on the school, wouldn't you know it, the Azov Battalion shows up. And they use the school as a fob to take pot shots at Russian forces in the region. They were there for several hours, somewhere 3, 4, or 5 hours. And as soon as they left the shelter, they got shelled. The shelter got shelled. Not the Azov soldiers. The school that they were using as a fob got shelled by Russian forces. Supposedly by Russian forces. I'm assuming it was Russian forces. Unless it was just an extension of that campaign of fear that the Azov Battalion started with the first night of the bombings. So dude asks her, "Why do you think that they were here for hours?" And for this entire conflict, so this happened 4 days ago. So for the first month of this conflict, nothing bad's happening. Russian soldiers are coming by from time to time, knocking on the door. "Hey, you seen any tiny mustache people?" And this day, after the battalion comes in, the shelter gets hit. And he asks why she thinks that happened. And she answered, and this, everything I'm telling you is what actual people in Ukraine are saying. Like, people who are at the battlefront are saying. She said that she believes the Azov soldiers who were there that day went upstairs and set up a forward operating base, a FOB, but ran it without any stealth. Intentionally. They intentionally were leaving all of these markers for, like, when you're in the military and you're looking for a forward operating base to attack, you look for these different things, and that's how you get your location for a fob and where to strike. And she said that they intentionally set up unencrypted equipment in this school and turned it on right before they left, so that Russian forces would mistake a former school turned into a shelter and food kitchen, mistake that as a forward operating base, and hit it. Those were her words. Her words. And that's difficult. That is a very difficult thing to wrap your head around, because we haven't really seen that kind of indifference on a battlefield in decades, have we? Near 100 years, I would say. Somewhere around 80. That kind of indifference, not only to the suffering of the other side, because the United States and NATO have that exact indifference. We killed more people on the first night of the shock and awe of Baghdad than Russia has killed in the entire last month. So I'm used to seeing indifference toward civilians on the other side of the front. But I'm not used to seeing indifference to civilians on your side of the front. That is very much a tiny mustache tactic, and also a hammer sickle tactic as well. But in this specific case, we're talking about Azov, which the guy who was running security forces out of Mariupol and was in Sartana and got interviewed, he was saying that he knew it was going to end up like this, because years and years ago, people in the Azov battalion started being very open about their philosophical ideologies, and they were, already back then putting the crooked X. I'm trying to think of terms that YouTube won't immediately flag me for. But they put that little symbol on their shirts and on their flags, and they even, like, the motorcycle brigade of the Azov battalion had it, like, on a little flag on the back of their motorcycles. He was like, I knew it was going to end up like this, because these people are openly tiny mustache people. Very openly tiny mustache people. And we're now in a situation where they are very openly using tiny mustache tactics. Where, if this woman's right, they intentionally went in to a humanitarian aid center, used it as a fob, took pot shots at Russian forces for hours, and then set up signature equipment so the Russian military would find it and mistake it as a fob, which, taking pop shots from that location for hours will also help you mistake a location as a fob and shell it. And that's a level of indifference I'm not really comfortable with. I'm very uncomfortable with this situation that's happening in this region. And by the way, all of this is in Donetsk. All of this is in the regional territory of the DPR. All of it. But the reason I'm not okay with associating the Azov battalion with the Ukrainian military at this point is that 4 days ago, the order came down from Kiev to the Azov to surrender Mariupol. And the Azov refused. They refused to surrender the city. They intend on dying down to the last soldier and civilian in that city, even to the point where a video I saw from last week where this tension between Kiev and Azov was starting, and Kiev had already pulled out their forces from Mariupol on February 28th. So that's how long Ukraine was like, no, we don't want this. And last week there was a conscript, a Ukrainian conscript, who was, sent to the city at just in more of a policing measure than anything. And as soon as his group got to the edge of the city, which is where they were going to be doing their policing, they weren't going into the city because the city was already held by Azov. And he said that as soon as he got out of the truck, the Azov battalion just opened fire on them, just opened fire. And he even said that the only reason he was alive to do that interview is because there were three Russian Special Forces operators who saw it happen, saw them get out of the truck, and they're like, "Hey, how's it going?" And then Azov starts shooting at these dudes, and these three soldiers run over and pull as many of these dudes out as they could out of the line of fire over to the position that Russian Special Forces had taken in like this little corner outside of the city. And he's like I said, the dude said the only reason he is alive is because Russian Special Forces pulled him out of the line of fire from his supposed comrades in the Azov. And they even released him because they asked him some questions like about his military experience, and they realized, oh, you're not actually a soldier, you're a conscript, you're literally a civilian that they just handed a gun to. You can take your chances going on that side of the city to leave, but you're probably going to get shot, or you can go this way back to Donetsk and you can just seek refuge there until the war's over. And that's what he decided to do. So the reason that this information disturbs me to this level is Azov is the name that comes up in every single stage of what's going on here. So 10 years ago, Azov started the suppression of Donetsk. The Ukrainian government also had a major hand in that. I'm not going to lie. There was a woman, the first woman was talking about how years ago they had a referendum on what the official language of the region was going to be. And there was an overwhelming vote in support of making the regional dialect Russian. And in response to that, Kiev decided, you know what? Not only are we not going to allow you to make Russian the primary language of Donetsk, we're going to fine and or imprison you if you don't speak Ukrainian. If you speak any language that's not Ukrainian in Donetsk region, then we are just going to fine you, or we might just throw you in jail. So that's not good. That's not good in and of itself. But regardless, that was a different regime in Kiev. That's not Zelensky. It's not like Zelensky really did anything to help this situation, but at least he didn't try to make it worse. So they take that approach, and Azov at the same time is carrying out this campaign against Donetsk and against civilians. Like, it started as false imprisonment, and then it escalated to inappropriate behaviors, because I can't say the R word and I can't say the SA phrase either. Inappropriate behaviors with female citizens, which escalated to inappropriate behavior with children, which escalated to public executions and public inappropriate behavior. And that's just rolled. It's just kept on rolling. So Azov essentially started this fight between Ukraine and Donetsk. And then Azov carried out the shelling and the bombing campaigns against Donetsk for years now. And now, here's Azov again. Apparently, according to the citizens on the ground, they're carrying out false flag attacks and intentionally setting up civilians as targets so they can use them either as shields or as propaganda. And that makes me wonder now, with this theater that got hit in Kiev, or outside Kiev, definitely Western Ukraine. I can't remember exactly where it is, where 300 civilians just died because they got hit by a Russian missile. And now I can't help but wonder, was there someone from Azov, someone from leadership who was in the area and they were like, I got this, I know what I'm going to do. And they did the exact same thing that they did in that school. They set up all of the equipment that you would be looking for a forward operating base, ran it with zero encryption so that it would be found, and bam, Russia attacks a shelter that has 1,000 people in it because they didn't know that it was a shelter. Because this branch of the military in Ukraine is intentionally trying to get Russians to bomb civilians by making them think they're bombing the military. And that's according to Ukrainians on the ground. That's not my opinion. That is the opinion, and what it seems to be a fact-based opinion more often than not, of Ukrainians on the ground. And if that is the case, we in the West need to hold up. As Kyle Kalinske would say, www.chillout.com. We need to hit up that URL. By the way, I barely listen to Kyle. It's just that he's like the most respectable voice among the left that I can tolerate listening to. And yeah, if all of this is true, we have been lied to. We have been propagandized on a level that's even beyond our imagining. Like, I did not imagine that it would get to this level, where these citizens would be very openly pointing their finger at this tiny mustache brigade in southwestern Ukraine, constantly pouring fuel on this fire, trying to get a war between Russia and NATO at all costs. At all costs. Doesn't matter if it costs civilian lives on the other side of the line. Doesn't matter if it costs civilian lives on this side of the line. They are willing to let each and every single person die just to push forward this agenda that'll bring a war between NATO and Russia. And that should terrify you just as much as it terrifies me. So, we'll see if this one gets taken down. I don't know. I really don't know. It seems the Overton window is pretty big right now, so maybe not. But at the same time, this is not a popular opinion, so maybe so. But until next time, be vigilant, keep your eyes open, and try your best to find information from the ground there. Like, from people that are actually on the battlefront. Try to find information from them. I'll see y'all next time. Love y'all.